Colegas, gostaria de agradecer aos oradores, primeiro, presidente e diretor executivo de Resolve to Save Lives, Dr. Tom Frieden. Gostaria de agradecer ao colega Chizuru Nishida, chefe da unidade transversal de dietas seguras, saudáveis, sustentáveis, Departamento de Nutrição e Segurança Alimentar da OMS. Também os nossos colaboradores, doutora Carla Spinello e Carlos Felipe Urquizar, da Federal do Paraná, no Brasil, meu colega Edgardo de Grácia, da OPAS. Gostaria de reconhecer também nossos participantes que trarão experiência de país, Ministério da Saúde do Canadá, Chantal Martineau e Isabelle de Monti, da Guiana, Dr. Marlon Cole, do Peru, Beatriz Quispequi e Néstor Rejas Tatari. A OMS, no dia 14 de maio de 2018, lançou a iniciativa Replace para eliminar as gorduras trans produzidas industrialmente até 2023 para reduzir os óbitos devidos a doenças cardiovasculares, a principal causa de óbito no mundo. A eliminação desses elementos da cadeia alimentar é uma das metas prioritárias identificadas no projeto do 13º Programa Geral de Trabalho.
Pan American Health Organization also unanimously agreed to eliminate industry-produced trans fatty acids from the region of the Americas by 2023. Increased intake of trans fatty acids is associated with increased risk of coronary heart disease and mortality. Globally, more than 50,000 in 2010 were attributed to increased intake of trans fatty acids. Industry-produced trans fatty acids have no known health benefits, and its elimination from the food supply is feasible and achievable. During the past decade, various policy actions have been implemented by countries aiming to restrict trans fatty acids content of food and reduce its intake in their populations, including mandatory and voluntary labeling, reformulation, and national and local bans. Several countries have in fact virtually eliminated industry-produced trans fatty acids from the food supply through the implementation of systematic policy actions and monitoring programs. Recently this year, in the region of the Americas, Peru and Brazil joined Canada, Chile, and the United States of America as countries that had already eliminated the use of industry-produced trans fats in food products. The Replace Trans Fat course provides a strategic approach to eliminating industry-produced trans fatty acids from national food supplies with the goal of global elimination by 2023. This course is a how-to guide for landscape assessment and roadmap development for the elimination of industry-produced trans fatty acids. The course is developed in a form of self-learning using a virtual platform of the virtual campus of public health from PAHO. I am pleased to welcome you all to today's launch and dissemination of the self-learning virtual course, Replace Trans Fats, an action package to eliminate industry-produced trans fatty acids. We hope this is a space for discussion on the importance of the course and its content and renew our commitment to improving the health of the region. Thank you very much. So we can now continue with the words of Dr. Tom Frieden. Please go ahead, Dr. Tom Frieden. We're happy to have you here with us.
Thank you very much to PAHO for organizing this and to the countries who are sharing their very important lessons moving forward. Artificial trans fat is a toxic compound. It kills hundreds of thousands of people, and it does not have to be this way. Governments have a duty and the tools to protect their people from trans fat. Global artificial trans fat elimination will save an estimated 17.5 million lives over the next 25 years and prevent at least twice as many heart attacks. 3.5 years ago, the World Health Organization, for the very first time, called for complete elimination of a risk factor for a non-communicable disease with the elimination of artificial industrially produced trans fat from the global food supply. There's been good progress since then, but still too many lives continue to be lost to trans fat. Trans fat elimination is economically, politically, and technically feasible, and it saves lives at virtually no cost to governments or consumers. With the Replace Action Package, the World Health Organization provides countries a clear and effective way forward to remove this toxin from food through best practice policies. Since the launch of the Replace initiative, we've seen encouraging progress. Currently, 46 countries have adopted best practice policies. This covers more than 3 billion people. 33 of those countries, covering 2.5 billion people, passed their policies since the launch of Replace. This momentum can be attributed in significant part to effective regional initiatives, including the EU's best practice regulations, which went into effect this year, and the unprecedented action taken by countries in the PAHO region to unanimously approve an action plan to eliminate artificial trans fat from the Americas. And of course, it is in the Americas that there has been a lot of progress, not just on trans fat elimination, but also on the other leading edge nutrition policies. Chile was the second country globally behind Denmark to pass a best practice trans fat policy in 2008, and there are now 7 countries in the region that have adopted best practice trans fat policies. PAHO is the only WHO region that has a regional plan of action to eliminate artificial trans fat. Approval of the action plan by member states in 2019 is commendable, but now is the time for action. PAHO member states must act, adopt, implement best practice policies outlined in the plan of action. We're nearing a tipping point globally, but a stronger push is needed. With the momentum and supported framework of Replace and the PAHO action plan, countries in the Americas are well placed to drive progress to meet the WHO target of the global elimination of artificial trans fat by 2023. We'll need participation from governments and industry. Countries should continue to develop and implement best practice policies. And a policy win in any one country can help accelerate progress in neighboring countries. Continued investment in monitoring and surveillance is also important, as we can identify trans fats, remove them from processed foods, and promote the consumption of healthier oils. Resolve to Save Lives is honored to partner with WHO and PAHO on this effort, and will support countries to implement proven strategies to eliminate artificial trans fat and increase the availability of healthier alternatives. We commend PAHO for its leadership and actions to support country implementation of best practice trans fat policies, specifically including this virtual course launched today, and call on countries to take immediate action to eliminate trans fat at home and through regional action with their neighbors. Eliminating artificial trans fat is more important than ever. The COVID pandemic has shown the importance of effective government action and the importance of resilient, healthy populations. Making the world trans fat free will support economic recovery, reduce the burden on healthcare systems, and reduce the susceptibility of people all over the world to infectious diseases and to other health threats. Once trans fat is eliminated, our food will still taste great, and only our hearts will know the difference. Together, we can create a world free from trans fat by 2023. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frieden. We have a small problem with the translation.
Muito obrigado. Tivemos pequeno problema aqui com a interpretação. Vamos dar uns segundinhos para...
Tenemos un pequeño problema con los canales de traducción. Veo que están diciendo que ya están funcionando. It seems to be resolved. Okay, very good. So then we continue immediately with Dr. Chizuru Nishida from WHO Geneva for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Leo. Good afternoon from Geneva. Hello, Dr. Frieden. And dear colleagues and friends, First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to join you at this launch event on the self-learning virtual course on the Replace Action Package to Eliminate Industrially Produced Trans Fat. And congratulations really on the launching of this course. In 2018, the Director General, Dr. Tedros, announced WHO's commitment for the global elimination of industrially produced trans fat by 2023 as part of the 13th General Program of Work guiding the WHO's work for 2019 to 2023, which is now extended to 2025, in fact. At that time, WHO released the Replace Action Framework, which was a roadmap for countries to take actions in eliminating industrially produced trans fat. A year later, in May 2019, WHO then released the first trans fat elimination progress report, together with 6 replace modules. Since then, the replace modules have served as very useful and very variable tools for member states in guiding the steps which need to be taken to, 1, review dietary sources of industrially produced trans fat and assess the landscape of required policy change. 2, promote the replacement of trans fat by healthier fats and oils. 3, legislate or enact regulatory actions to eliminate industrially produced trans fat. 4, assess and monitor trans fat content and their replacement fat in the food supply, as well as changes in trans fat consumption in the population. 5, create awareness of the negative health impact of trans fat among policymakers, producers, suppliers, and the public. And 6, enforce the implication and compliance, the implementation and the compliance of policies and regulations, and replace. And these stands for each of the actions are standing for the acronym replace. Now we have the replace modules in Arabic, French, Russian, and Spanish, besides in English, in order to ensure and increase the effective use of these modules by member states who speak in different languages. This online self-learning Replace Action Package course, which you are launching today, will facilitate the further availability and utilization of the tool for effective country actions. The 3rd Trans Fat Elimination Progress Report will be released at the launching event to be held tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Geneva time, which will be 10:30 a.m. in Washington, D.C. The 3rd year progress report will highlight the tremendous progress made by the various member states during this past year, as Dr. Frieden also reiterated, and these include various member states' efforts, especially in the America regions and others. But much more needs to be done to achieve the global target of trans fat elimination by 2023, which is only 2 years away, as it was also very strongly highlighted by Dr. Frieden in his the message just before. We therefore believe that this online self-learning Replace Action Package course will play a very important role in supporting the strengthening of the capacities of policymakers in the national government and the other concerned stakeholders in the America region, but also globally. So we have a lot of expectation for the course. Again, congratulations on the launching of your online self-learning Replace Action Package course and on your very successful action in providing the tool, which will change the course of actions in many member states, clearly in the region, but also globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chizuru. I would now like to hand over to Fabio da Silva Gomez. He is the Regional Advisor on Nutrition and Physical Activity. He will present on the course and the content and will be moderating the rest of this session. Thank you very much, and go ahead, please, Fabio.
Thank you very much, Leo. It's a great pleasure to have everyone connected here. And I mean, it's really as Chizuru was mentioning, the idea that we can facilitate the replace package use throughout the region and hopefully to support other regions as well in doing so. And so I would start by giving an overview of where and how and what has motivated us to come up with the course and some of the main features of the course in an overall as an overall presentation, and then we'll have some more details from our colleagues and designers that worked in designing the course. So next slide, please. So we know that increased intake of trans fatty acids is associated with increased coronary heart disease and mortality, and globally more than 500,000 deaths in 2010 were attributed to increased intake of trans fatty acids. And we also know that industrially produced trans fatty acids have no known health benefits, and its elimination from the food supply is feasible and achievable. And that's why the WHO in 2018 launched the Replace Initiative to eliminate industrially produced trans fat by 2023. And as the region embraced that call, we've launched and approved unanimously a plan of action for the elimination of industrially produced trans fatty acids. And that brought our countries to commit to this elimination by 2023 and continue to monitor and enforce those policies to eliminate from 2023 to 2025. And next slide. And we also know that during the past decade, various policy actions have been implemented by countries in trying to restrict trans fatty acids content in food and reduce the consumption, the intake of trans fatty acids. And those varied from including mandatory trans fatty acids labeling, reformulation, front of pack labeling, national and local prohibitions of industrially produced trans fatty acids. And several countries already taken the elimination of industrially produced trans fatty acids from their food supply, and they're enacted that and implementing. So the course comes to help other member states and support other member states that haven't implemented yet to continue and have to expand this in the region to have more countries adopting, implementing, and enforcing. So depending on where the country is, if they haven't adopted yet, if they have adopted, they are to implement. If they have implemented, they are to enforce that, monitor, communicate on what are being the impacts. Then the online course is trying to bring, following what the replace package indicates, in a way that can facilitate the countries to advance that. So the course, the Replace Trans Fat course, is a how-to guide for the landscape assessment and a roadmap to develop and implement actions to eliminate industrially produced trans fatty acids, and outlines the 6 strategic action areas that support the prompt, complete, and sustained elimination of industrially produced trans fats from the food supply. So it's being developed, as mentioned before, as a self-learning course. It includes the 6 modules of the Replace Action Package. It also includes some self-reflective activities, media resources related to the module's contents. We'll see more details that later. Technical documents that can provide rationale or more details that everyone taking the course can learn from, and also additional web resources to facilitate implementation and framework for this integrated approach of TFA, IPTFA elimination. And as we see, the objectives of the course include the understanding, increasing the competency in the harms of products containing industrially produced trans fatty acids and trans fatty acids in general, learn about the replace package to eliminate industrially produced trans fatty acids, learn about how the plan of action of PAHO for elimination has been designed and what is committed in there, understand the steps in creating a strategic plan for the elimination of industrially produced trans fatty acids, including the research, the policy making, legislation, awareness campaign, the whole package that is required to get there. And then identify and understand the barriers and limitations of creating a strategic plan, and identify the resources needed to develop a strategic plan for the elimination of trans fatty acids. The modules will be most useful to national governments, including policymakers, food control and safety authorities, as well as subnational government bodies that advocate for or enforce policies relating to nutrition and food safety, but also other audiences that could benefit from the course. Could include, for instance, civil society organizations, academic and research institutions, nutrition scientists and laboratories, as well as food systems operators. And the replace action package includes models for each of the strategic action areas, giving details on how to fill scoping gaps and guide those actions. And these areas are presented each in the course models: so review, promote, legislate, assess, create, and enforce. And as we see in the module 1, review, this module will aim at introducing the replace action package and provide guidance on the initial scoping of activities, drafting of a country roadmap to achieve the elimination of industrially produced trans fatty acids. These initial scoping activities rely on information that's already known or can be obtained through desk review or discussions with key stakeholders with reference to other models as needed. On module 2, promote, this model aims to describe oil and fatty acids profiles and available replacement oils and fats, including the feasibility and considerations about the feasibility and possible interventions to promote healthier replacements. Then moving into module 3, legislate. This model aims to describe policy options in the current regulatory framework to eliminate industrially produced trans fatty acids, and to provide guidance on the assessment and the steps to guide policy design, development of regulations suitable to the country context, or updating the existing legal framework to match the approach recommended and the best practices recommended by the World Health Organization. Then on module 4, assess, we aim to describe the goals and methods for trans fatty acids assessment, provide guidance on how to design and carry out a study, and finding out the consumption of trans fatty acids using human samples or food samples. So it's trying to get more information about how the TFA is affecting consumption and also health in the country and in the food supply. Then module 5, create, aims to describe approaches to advocacy and communication campaigns to support the policy action, as providing guidance on key steps to design and implement effectively an advocacy and communication campaigns, and then evaluate the progress of those in bringing policies to be adopted, implemented, and enforced properly. And finally, at module 6, which is on enforcement, it aims to describe the trans fatty acids policy enforcement, how the elimination of industrially produced trans fatty acids is to be enforced. Includes the offenses and roles of different bodies of the government that will need to take action there, and also provide guidance on the mapping of existing, creating new enforcement powers and mechanisms in case there are more needed, public communications, penalties, funding, and timelines to establish a good enforcement for that. So just to give an overview of the duration and workload of the course, it's estimated that it takes about 60 to 9 minutes per module, and depending on the participants' level of knowledge on trans fatty acids and how much we need to go over more specific material and get extra reading, for instance. But in any case, it does include an estimated time to complete the course modules on the corresponding evaluation. In total would reach around 15 hours. So just want to leave this QR code here. It's already open, available in the PAHO WHO virtual campus of public health. You can access using the link we're gonna post it here in the chat, but also if you scan this QR code from your mobile phone, you can also go straight to there, register and starting and enroll yourself in the course and starting right away. So we'll move now into our next presentations, which will give us some more details about the development and design features that we have in the course. So I'll hand to Dr. Carla Espinillo, who is information design researcher from the Federal University of Paraná, to get a little bit more details on the course design and implementation onto our virtual campus. Thank you very much, Carla.
Olá, bom dia a todos. Obrigada, Fábio.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Fábio. I would like to thank in the name of my team. To be here participating with all of you, it's an honor. We also like to talk about the course Replace. For us, this is a fundamental tool, so we can build public policies, so we can reduce the trans fatty all over the world. This presentation today will be joined with Dr. Carlos Rojas.
Carlos é doutorando aqui no nosso programa.
Carlos is going through his PhD. Carlos, could you share the screen with us so we can start a presentation?
Também, tudo
Can
okay.
everybody see my screen?
Então, vamos apresentar o conceito de design.
So we will present the concept, the design concept behind the interface.
Pode passar, Carlos. Vamos
This is
falar
the interface for Replace course. We will talk in 3 main points: the theoretical framework, the design concept, and interface and resource design.
Pode passar, Carlos.
The theoretical framework, the information design, was based on some theories. First of all, we need to limit the elements in the interface, and we need to harmonize this composition. So we can build clusters, group of informations that will facilitate the cognitive process for the users and the one that will be learning about Replace content. This also helps us to lower the cognitive load when we use the internal material. It could also be done on a screen, or how you visualize the screen with charts, graphics, and others.
Ela se encontra embasada na
So this is all based on a way to promote a positive learning experience. For the ones they're acting, they're working, they're learning based on the Replace contents and how we are going to build public policies. And we have here an example. This is just like a honeycomb. And we see the information and how we're going to build elements for the interface. The institutional material has to be valuable, and it has to communicate instructions, and it needs to have qualities. It needs to be useful. It needs to be useful for the ones that are learning, for the users. It needs to be usable. The interface needs to allow a visualization And we need to see the interaction elements. It also needs to be accessible for the ones that have any sort of difficulty using or such like a nice site, or it needs to be also clear to read. We also need to make it easier to find the content. The user should not get lost trying to find the content and what it should be accessing. So all interface elements need to be combined. It needs to be easy to find it. So even after we integrate, we need to make interesting. The content needs to be interesting. It needs to promote an engagement. And we build on graphic elements that are harmonious, they are aesthetically pleasing. It needs to be pleasable to see. It won't make you tired to see it. But finally, it needs to be credible. When we work with serious content, such the content for the replace course, this is very important, but it's also an educational tool from the PAHO. It's a PAHO educational resource, so you know that it's credible. So all those qualities organized and integrated will give value to the experience. It will give a valuable experience to the users. So we've been talking about promoting the experience. We talk about multimedia approach and multimedia material, and this needs to be effective. So first of all, we need to reduce the spontaneous processing caused by unnecessary elements. Elements that are not necessary in the screen, that makes it hard to absorb the information. We also need to manage essential processing. This is necessary for the user, and it's necessary when you deal with complex content, such as the replace course. And finally, to engage the user, we need to engage generative processing. And this is required when we need to select, organize, and integrate parts of the existing knowledge together with long-term memory. So to use those three strategies to build upon the educational resource with the replace. So we have modules with brochures. They were done in PDF, and over time we started transforming it in visual resources. And we needed to have resources to evaluate it. So with all this material, we started making videos, podcasts, infographics, animations. So we would build a design in each screen of the replace. So we needed to develop a design concept, an information design that's based on theories and approaches. So we have the visual design. The visual design is based in two pillars. That it is to work in a realistic and natural approach that is also based on has the weight of the content, the weight of documents and witness from experts in the field. And also countries that have implemented it already. We need also to talk about foods and they have trans fatty. We also needed to add news. And on the other pillar we have schematic abstract, which have concepts and explanations. They're added within the content of the replace. So we can add public policies and necessary strategies for the planet. We also have a hybrid situation.
Here are some examples of photos of food, and another one We had several icons associated with the use of photos, the use of maps, several geographic situations of the countries are represented here with colors and interactions, and also data, numeric data necessary to support the content that was worked in a hybrid way, combining graphs and images. And we also took into consideration simulations of video platforms, meeting resources, and and searching tools, and we projected that on the screen in order to highlight them. This is an example of how we work this emulating a video platform, and this is a simulation of interaction with videos that simulate an interaction to reach the content of Replace. Finally, I would like to say that all of this together shows how the information design has this transformative role to promote engagement and efficient communication of content for the Replace course. And Carlos will show us now how this happened within Replace. Thank you, Carla. I would like to start with some figures. We worked in a group of 4 specialists, an illustrator, and we worked for over 1,650 hours. Within this, we developed over 400 visual resources, photographs, animations, icons, diagrams, and maps. The script had over 128 pages with 572 screens of events to develop all of the modules of the course. I would like to bring you this information so that you have an idea of the efforts put into this. I'll give you some examples of interaction and navigation design. Here we see a screen which is rather simple and includes all 6 modules of the course from beginning to end, from reviewing to implementing. This, on the left, we have the original brochure, and on the right, the same content with a visual image to make it easier to absorb the content. This is a relationship between a physical change and molecular composition. On the right, it's much easier to understand. This is another example. We want to broaden the engagement using the very same content of the brochure, but with a screen that uses a photograph with margarines and spreads, baking products, frying and grilling, and this makes everyday life much easier. Here, we use 2 pages of the brochure that was already used, and we applied it visually in the guide and simplifying the content so that each person can use their own pace and have at the same time a general idea of the content. Another interaction that we used in the course was this sort of menu, which is an interactive one where we illustrate better the content of the brochure. we have icons that support the content and images that illustrate what is being presented, which makes it easier to understand and harmonize the content. In other cases, there are schemes that happen that help understand content that has 3 or even 4 levels of complexity. In other cases, there was a lot of content for the same topic, and this visualization gives the general idea of the complexity, and there is a segmentation of this complexity so that it can be understood step by step. Here, we have 9 steps. The users can get lost reading the brochure, over 15 pages, and this is a general idea so that the user can, at his or her pace, evolve in their study.
Sugere uma substituição de gorduras que é muito complexa.
This topic is a replacement of oils and fats. We could divide the complexity that you see on the left and simplify it as you saw on the right. During the whole course, the user is able to download the original tables as many times as they wish. In the PAHO channels, there were already a lot of material, multimedia material. This is a 360-degree video, and this was incorporated in the course. Other materials were developed exclusively for replays. For example, specialists talking about their fields, and this is a specialist from Canada. All of these resources are brought together and are of very easy access by the users. This is an interaction simulation, but I would like to show you a 1-minute video with these examples of interfaces.
And welcome to the Replace Trans Fat course. It is a how-to guide for landscape assessment and roadmap development for elimination of trans fats.
The most effective way your team can do this is by using interviews with relevant actors and meetings with lawmakers and the staff.
The Replace Trans Fat course provides a strategic approach to eliminating industrially produced TFA from national food supplies. 7 modules, self-reflective activities, media resources related to the module's contents. Replace Trans Fat package with 6 brochures in PDF with the contents of the course modules, overarching technical document that provides a rationale, additional web resources to facilitate implementation and framework for this integrated approach to TFA elimination. Hello, and
E era isso. E eu gostaria de agradecer a toda a equipe.
That was it. I'd like to thank the team for their help in the development of the course. This course was a collective effort with this vision that we have and are bringing to you. Thank you very much, and I wish you all success. Thank you very much, Carla. Now that we've already heard about the science, the design, and the science behind the development of the tool, we are going to hear Edgardo de Gracia Tejada, a specialist in virtual collaboration with the PAHO about the implementation of this course in the virtual campus of PAHO. You can sign up, participate, and enjoy the course.
Thank you very much, Fabio. My name is Edgardo de Gracia. I am a senior engineer, and I am also a consultant on online learning and the virtual campus. I am in charge of the technology and cloud computing behind these virtual classrooms, and I am highly motivated seeing the number of individuals that we reach through these courses, and also the number of health professionals and nurses that apply what they have learned through these courses in their countries. Today, I am going to show you how to have access to this self-learning course on replays organized by the Pan American Health Organization. First, you need to log into our main portal through campusvirtual.org, or just search public health virtual campus in your browser, in your favorite browser. The first step is to create an account if you do not have it, and the account creation process is very important, especially if you use your own and a valid email, since you will be receiving an activation email in that on that address. Once you complete the activation of your account, you initiate the process, the session with your name and password. Then you go into self-learning and choose the course. Please do read the information that you see on the screen and click on the button that says replace. Those who complete all of the activities will be able to download the completion certificate, as you see it on the screen. And then if you have any doubts, please do reach out and we will be addressing your questions within 48 hours. The most frequent concern that we see among our users have to do with account activation, or also the recovery of usernames or passwords. In both cases, you will be receiving an email from our own system with instructions, directions on as to how to do it. And if you do not find this, it is very important to verify this in your spam or junk folder, and also to mark our emails as wanted emails so that you can receive our notifications. As pieces of advice, please always finish what you start, and also implement whatever you learn. At the end of the course, there is a survey that we systematically, regularly implement. If you like the course, please do share this with everyone that you think might be interested. And also, if you'd like to be informed about new activities or new courses, we invite you to follow us on the social media. I wish you the very best on behalf of the staff behind the virtual campus here at PAHO. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Edgardo.
El curso, cuál es la ciencia por detrás.
Now that we heard the course and also the science behind this course and how you can participate, we are now going to listen to our own member countries in the Americas as to what steps they have followed, they have taken to eliminate the industrially produced trans fatty acids, and also how they envision the use of tools such as Replace, this course that is attempting to translate into easier, more accessible concepts this package for the elimination of IPTFA, how countries can be helped in their process to implement or to enforce these measures for the elimination of IPTFA. So we are going to start now with, we have
with our colleagues from Canada, Chantal Martineau, manager of the regulatory projects for nutrition regulations and standards division of Health Canada, and Isabel De Monte, research scientist of the Dietary Lipids and Health and Nutrition and Research Division of Health Canada. We'll also have today with us Dr. Marlon Cole from Guyana. He's the head of Food and Drug Department of the Ministry of Guyana. And from Peru, Beatriz Quispequille, Dirección de Promoción de la Salud de la DGIESP, y Néstor Rejas Tataje, Dirección de Promoción de la Salud de la DGIESP también.
Who is also with the Office of Health Promotion with DGS.
Chantal and Isabel, so if you could let us go through your experience. Thank you very much, Esti. You already have your slides. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Bom dia, buenos dias, bonjour. It's a pleasure to join you today along with my colleagues, Isabel De Monte. She's a research scientist at Health Canada in the same department in the Bureau of Nutritional Sciences, and she'll be joining me to talk about during the Q&A session. So I think I'm still showing my speaking slides. Here we go. All right, always technology. And I apologize if you hear a little bit of background noise. We had snow here in Canada last night, so there's a lot of activity with snow removal happening. So today I'll provide a quick overview of Health Canada's work to reduce trans fat intake of Canadians, including the recent prohibition on the use of partially hydrogenated oils in the food supply. In the 1990s, Canadians had one of the highest trans fat intake in the world. Average intake was estimated to be approximately 3.7% of energy intake. To address this issue, Health Canada, since the early 2000s, pursued a multifaceted approach to reduce trans fat intakes. And there were really four main components to the multifaceted approach. First was requiring trans fat labeling on prepackaged foods. That was followed by setting voluntary targets for trans fat content in foods and monitoring how industry was doing to meet those targets through the trans fat monitoring program. And finally, we introduced the prohibition of partially hydrogenated oils in foods as the last component of this approach. So in the next few slides, I'll give you a quick overview of those four components of the strategy. In 2002, Health Canada introduced regulations making it mandatory for foods to carry a nutrition facts table. So the regulations were introduced in 2002, but industry was given a period of 5 years to come into compliance with those regulations. So in 2007, the nutrition facts table became mandatory. And this is an example of a nutrition facts table, and trans fat, as you see here, is one of the 13 core nutrients that are required to be declared on the nutrition facts table. So you see that trans fat is declared under the fat heading, along with saturated fat. So companies have to declare the trans fat in grams, and then we have a percent DV that combines the amount of saturated fat and trans fat to help consumers really assess, the amount of trans and saturated fat. Then the second component was the voluntary limit on trans fat content. In 2004, Health Canada established a multi-stakeholder task force whose mandate was to develop recommendations and strategies to effectively eliminate trans fat in Canadian foods to the lowest, well, actually reduce trans fat to the lowest level possible. The task force actually did quite a bit of work and analysis, looking at the food supply, assessing the situation, and then in 2006 came out with specific recommendations, and their recommendation was to limit by regulation trans fat with the limits that we've heard about before, the 2% for total fat for oils and spreads, and the 5% of total fat for all other foods. The following year, in 2007, the Minister of Health decided to adopt the limit as voluntary targets and committed to monitoring and reporting publicly on progress achieved through the trans fat monitoring program. So just to see, so let's try and establish voluntary targets, see how things evolve in the food supply, and then decide kind of the following steps afterwards. So the trans fat monitoring program, through the trans fat monitoring
Então, o
program.
programa de monitoramento da gordura trans.
Oh, you can hear the translator.
I apologize.
That's okay. So through the trans fat monitoring program, over 1,100 foods were analyzed. So they were actually laboratory analysis of those foods, along with looking at the labeling information for these products. And really by 2011, it showed that a large majority of food categories were meeting the targets. However, we still had food categories with quite a bit of trans fat in them and exceeding the targets. And this slide here, you see this is showing kind of the problematic categories that we found in the category of prepackaged foods. We had dairy-free cheeses, and you see on the y-axis, it's actually the percentage of food exceeding the targets. So in this category, the dairy-free cheeses, all of them exceeded the targets. And this is frosting, so we had quite, the large majority of frosting also exceeding the targets. Coffee whiteners, lard and shortening, shortbread cookies, and refrigerated dough. The monitoring program also looked at food service establishments and also cafeterias, etc., in public settings. So it was very comprehensive. But in general, it really showed that there was much improvement over, when you compare to the 1990s. However, there still wasn't, we weren't quite where we wanted to be. And in fact, a risk assessment was conducted in 2011 to look at estimated average trans fat intake in Canadians. And it showed that it had decreased from 3.7% to 1.42%. So quite a significant decrease. However, some subpopulation were still at risk, for higher trans fat intake, and those included children and teens, Canadian living in remote areas, and lower income groups. So that leads us to our kind of final chapter in the trans fat story in Canada. In 2016, to achieve the public health objective of reducing trans fat intake of the majority of the population to less than 1% of total energy, Health Canada proposed to prohibit the use of PHO in foods sold in Canada. We get asked a lot, so why do a prohibition rather than mandate the limits? And actually, I listed 3 reasons here on the slide, but probably the one that actually I was working on my presentation this weekend and actually deleted the first bullet, which was, in 2015, the US had removed the GRAS status. So the GRAS status is generally recognized as safe status for PHO. So ultimately meaning that in the US, you could no longer add PHO to foods. So that played into the decision to go with the prohibition rather than mandate the limits. That way we were aligned with the US in terms of the approach that was used. Also, a prohibition specifically targets the source of industrial fat that can be eliminated completely from the food supply. It also levels the playing field across the country. So and that's really more for mandatory regulation. It levels the playing field across the country, as some Canadian provinces had already implemented regulation in their jurisdictions. So for example, in British Columbia, they had already introduced trans fat regulation in cafeterias. So by introducing regulations at the national level, it really it ensures that across the country, we have low intakes of industrially produced trans fat across the country, basically. The other advantage also with the PHO prohibition is for enforcement purposes, it allows for the use of the listed ingredient as a tool to help determine compliance with the regulation. So those were a few of the advantages of going with the prohibition of partially hydrogenated oils. So as we developed, we announced in 2016 that we intended to bring in tougher regulation. And through the process, as with any regulations, we consulted on a few occasions. And really, when we consult, it really helps us fine-tune the final regulations, and we take into comments from stakeholders, consumers, industry stakeholders, health professional association, etc. So it's always a very important process of developing the final regulations. So the notice of proposal for the regulation describe how the prohibition would be integrated into the Canada's food and drug regulation. And what we proposed initially with the first round of consultation was to adding PHOs to part 1 of the list of contaminants and other adulterating substances in foods. And I'll show you this list in a second. So in early 2007, we proposed to amend the regulation in such a way to add PHO to the list. And in September 15, 2017, we did publish a notice of modification. So after the notice of proposal comes the notice of modification. And this notice of modification basically confirm our final decision to prohibit PHOs by adding them to the part 1 of the list of contaminants and other adulterating substances in foods. And you see here the list. So the list, so you see partially hydrogenated oil is number 18 on the list. So this was added. And you see all these different ingredients. Part 1 of the list, any of these ingredients cannot be added to foods in Canada. If they're found in food in Canada, the food is actually considered adulterated and the food non-compliant with the regulations in Canada. Part 2 of the list actually has levels. So there are certain ingredients that are permitted at low levels, but for ingredients that are added in part 1 of the list, they cannot be added to any food at any level. So as with any regulation, we use a phased-in implementation for the regulation. So as I mentioned, the notice of modification was published in September 2017. PHOs were added to part 1 of the list in September 2018, 1 year later. As of September 2018, PHOs could no longer be used to manufacture foods for sale in Canada. However, foods containing PHOs that were manufactured before September 2018 could be sold until September 2020 to exhaust stocks and avoid unnecessary food waste by food industry. However, by September 2020, no food sold in Canada can contain PHOs. In terms of post-prohibition activities, in Canada, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is responsible for enforcement of all the food regulation. And so they're responsible to enforce the new regulation. They verify compliance through oversight activities such as inspections, audit, or sampling. And they're currently they've been developing a laboratory method for enhancing the detection of PHOs in foods. We actually verified with our CFIA colleagues, and the method has not yet been finalized, but they have been working on this. And of course, with anything else, delays in part due to COVID, but that's their intention to develop this method. They also may verify at the domestic manufacturing production level whether PHOs are being added to foods at the same time, at the time of inspection, through ingredient verification. And Health Canada will continue to monitor trans fat exposure using data from national surveys. We have 2 major nutrition surveys in Canada. One, the Canadian Health Measure Survey, and through that we'll measure blood cell measurement of trans fat. And through the Canadian Community Health Survey, which is a food intake survey, we will do surveillance of intakes of of trans fat and saturated fat, actually, through this survey. And my colleague, Isabel, is really the lead on this work. And so that's why I brought her with me, because I'm sure there will be questions related to surveillance. So she can help me answer any questions we have in the Q&A period. And that's it. And I did include, so I'm sure the presentation will be shared, some key links to the notice of proposal that I mentioned, notice of modification, and the list that I mentioned also in my presentation. We also have the news release that might be useful for countries working on this and eventually that want to publish, through their Minister of Health or higher senior officials, the good news about prohibition or regulations related to trans fat. So I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chantal. And I'm gonna move straight to, we're flying straight from Canada to Guyana with Dr. Marlon Cole. Dr. Marlon.
Oh, thank you, Fabio. Good morning, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes. Onwards.
I wasn't told of a presentation, actually, a slide presentation. I learned about sharing the experience of Guyana and what are we doing as it relates to trans fatty acid. Sometime in 2018, we participated in the training, I believe it was in Mexico, on trans fat and how we in Guyana would address this situation. And that is the risk that is involved with trans fatty acid and partially hydrogenated oil. What we recognize quickly, just 1 second, please. Yes, sorry about that. What we did after the exposure in 2019 and looking at the data relative to cardiovascular disease, and also recognizing the fact that most persons who are affected with cardiovascular disease during this COVID-19 pandemic, which has resulted in a syndemic as well, those persons who are affected by cardiovascular disease have an increased risk of being severely affected by COVID-19 or die as a result because of their existing condition. And so as a country, we recognize that unlike what happened in 2011 with voluntary compliance in 2008, the Rio Declaration, that now in the 21st century, regulatory compliance and enforcement with cardiovascular as it relates to trans fat or partially hydrogenated oil is absolutely necessary. What we did therefore is to insert in our regulation that we're currently revising, that is the laws of Guyana Food and Drug Act. We included a clause in the regulation for labeling to place a ban on partially hydrogenated oil I believe 3 or 2 years after the enactment of our legislation. Also, we included a clause regarding labeling, composition, sorry, for foods, that food must not include more than 5% of trans fatty acids. We're now in the consultation stages of our revised legislation, and we're hoping to work with the industry. Our 5%, I believe we stated that it must be 2 to 3 years after the regulation comes into force. This is necessary for us to give the industry an opportunity to reformulate or replace. In our experience in working with the industry regarding front of package labeling for salts and sugars, we recognize that working with the industry should be closer and must have some added priority, because if you don't get the industry on board, it becomes very, very difficult to pass the legislation in Parliament. So our recent experience with that has taught us that it's absolutely necessary for us to be working with the industry. I know this is the launch of the virtual course on trans fat, of which we are hoping to ensure all our inspectors, food inspector, food safety officers participate in this course to help with the awareness. Also persons from the industry and in the food and nutrition department of the Ministry of Health. What we recognize in the course, however, is not a criticism, but that element in the course where the strategy to work with the industry, to my mind, is not sufficiently emphasized. I don't know, Fabio, if in the future modules that same would be included, that framework, how to engage with the industry as a strategy is very, very important, because with our experience with front of package labeling, we recognize that the industry has been a pushback with the deciding on the type of information to be placed at the front of the package. What we're doing in Guyana as well, we have an integrated prevention and control of non-communicable disease strategy, which is 2021-2030. Inclusive in that strategy is what is topical in that strategy, 2021-2030, is the elimination of trans fatty acids. But when we looked at the composition of the strategy, they hadn't gone too far enough in terms of an elimination strategy within the strategy. So we're working on ensuring that the industry participate, the regulators participate, and those functionaries at the Ministry of Health. It would be very, very challenging while we include that clause in our legislation that is currently being revised to put a total ban on partially hydrogenated oil. We have the 5% on limit for food with trans fatty acids. Now, how would that be enforced in a resource-challenged country like Guyana? It will be very, very difficult for us to sample all of the food products that are highly processed. And we are, in some cases, 45 to 60% of our food consumptions are imported into Guyana. So the majority of highly processed food that may contain trans fatty acid or partially hydrogenated oil would be included in our foods that are being imported into Guyana. And as a resource-challenged country with less than 1 million persons, developing laboratory capacity to monitor same would be very, very challenging and difficult. But what we have observed is that the Codex Alimentarius would allow for that technical barrier to trade where food safety is concerned, sanitary or phytosanitary measures. Now, the Watford Borough Council of England, when they issue foods, a free sales certificate or a sanitary certificate, included on that certificate is a clause, is in the attestation clause. And we know Codex Alimentarius allows for food that travels across borders to be accompanied as requested by a sanitary or phytosanitary certificate or a free sale certificate. So judging from the reality of Guyana, where we would be unable to develop the laboratory capacity to test all the foods that is coming into the country, what would be helpful is for that sanitary certificate to state whether the food that is coming, if it is free of partially hydrogenated oil, and if PAHO, along with the international community, WHO, can enforce in that attestation clause, particularly for middle income and middle income developing countries, where they export from developing countries, can help us to screen or eliminate partially hydrogenated oil or trans fat, food of trans fat that are being exported to your country. I will read for you in the Watford Borough Council that has used a document for the exportation of food to Guyana. And I noticed in that document, this is what it said: the food have been stored at the above premises, which are subject to the requirements of regulations number 852, 2004. And that regulation, hygiene of foodstuff, and the food hygiene, England, regulation 2006. These goods are fit for human consumption, edible, not containing lard, and free from all types of germs and human additives. Germs and harmful additives, sorry. Now, that clause, that attestation clause there that says not containing lard is actually not containing partially hydrogenated oil. Now, what I recognize is that, look, we in a resource-challenged environment can utilize these type of documentation for food that are highly processed, that is coming from developed countries, to help us to screen partially hydrogenated, to ensure there's no movement of partially hydrogenated oil across borders, and those highly processed food that would contain trans fat. We would, because in our legislation, if the food is not freely sold in the jurisdiction in which it is manufactured, it is illegal for you to ship it to Guyana. A case in point, if food like the presenter just now in Canada that said a 5% partially hydrogenated trans fat in product. Now, those food products that are above 5% that are manufactured in Canada, and sometimes they have on the certificate for export purposes only, that should be outlawed. Meaning, products that are going to developing countries and so as well should be free of these products. And so I think that would be a good strategy for us here in this region to utilize sanitary and phytosanitary certificate. One, to outlaw partially hydrogenated oil that may not be used in developing countries to be exported to our territory. And highly processed food, which would be very difficult for us to monitor on a regular and sustainable basis and in an affordable way. We should have those being screened, just like the Waterborough Council in England would say, not containing lard. They can say not containing trans fat, more than 5%. They now would have the capacity to screen and monitor those food that are being. Reciprocally, our local manufacturers, we can include in our document that is exporting food intra-regionally and extra-regionally, to include in our attestation clause as well, products that, and so our local manufacturer would be forced to be in compliance. Lastly, so that's my observation of what can be done by OPS or the Pan American Organization to enhance sanitary and phytosanitary measures with the objective as well, not for only for the food to be free of germs and safe to eat and manufacturing and nutrition, but as well to deal with this issue of trans fatty acids. And of course, you can add high in sugar and high in salts there as well. Lastly, what we're doing in Guyana, we're currently procuring a gas chromatographer, a GC, so that we can look at the fatty acid profiles for food products. And we will new GC in our department in about 2 to 3 weeks. And then sometime in February, March, we will build capacity with chemists in the department to do the detection of trans fatty acid in food. I noticed in Canada, they are now developing that methodology to screen, and we would be benefiting hopefully from a consultant to work in our laboratory for over 6 weeks to help us with this screening. So that is what we would want to add in terms of what we're doing in our with our limited resources as a strategy to deal with trans fatty acids, which we know is the leading cause of non-communicable disease where cardiovascular disease is concerned. Over 17 million deaths, I believe, for 2021 alone. And the compound, how it has been compounding the COVID-19 response as well. So thank you very much. I'm hoping that there would be no questions for me because we haven't been doing much, but those are what we're thinking in terms as a strategy for a resource limited society. And we're hopeful that most, if not all of our food regulators, inspectors, we would encourage them to do the course so they can be aware of the risks that is associated with the trade of trans fatty acid and partially hydrogenated oil in our food chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cole. I think not only for the comments and for the suggestions and insights, we're going to go through them during the questions and answer sessions after this session here. I'll move straight to our colleagues in Peru, Beatriz Quispeki, Nestor Rejas Tataje, which will give us a little bit of overview of what Peru has taken as action to eliminate industrially produced trans fatty acids. Thank you very much. Adelante, Nestor. Adelante, Beatriz.
Please go ahead, Nestor and Beatriz. Thank you very much, Fabio. Greetings to everyone. Beatriz is amongst the participants. Could you perhaps allow her to unmute her microphone, as she will be giving part of the presentation, and she will be answering all questions because she is one of the main leaders of this activity. Let me share with you the experience in implementation of policies to eliminate trans fatty acids in Peru. This summarizes the regulatory framework and the milestones for the start of implementation in Peru. The legislation or approval of regulatory measures. In 2016, talks about the labels of trans fatty acids in Article 033. This was implemented through a law. This is the highest level possible for implementation in Peru. In 2013, it was complemented with another law on healthy food for children and adolescents. And let me point out here that at first the law addressed the entire population, but then because of a policy matter or a political point, Congress members and the government decided to highlight it for children and adolescents. Foods must say that they contain trans fats and consumption must be avoided. That is what gives rise to food publicity. They must appear on the label when commercializing the foods and alcoholic beverages.
In 2016, a resolution was issued. It was a Supreme Decree, which is similar. It's a similar text similar to that of the law, but in this case it is issued by the President of the Republic, and here it is indicated that the gradual decrease up to elimination of trans fats in non-alcoholic beverages and foods is ordered. Then in 2017, the regulation of law 30-021, that is to say 4 years after the law was passed, these regulations were issued, and here there is reference to the law on the promotion of healthy nutrition. And then in 2016, the Supreme Decree, I should underscore, indicated that this law was going to start being implemented in 2021. So finally, in 2018, it was possible to issue Supreme Decree, and together with that, the manual on advertising ad warnings, and this is in connection also with the law on the promotion of healthy nutrition for boys, girls, and teens. And here we see at the bottom how this information has to be included with the foodstuff, indicating that this consumption of this type of food is not advisable. Then law 29571, in connection with the Code on the Protection and Defense of Consumers, it refers to the protection of consumers in connection with foodstuff, and at Article 36, we see reference to the labeling of trans fats when a specific type of food contains some sort of fat. It has to be, or trans fat, considered trans fat, it should be labeled, and it also indicates that the companies have to state the amount of trans fats per 100 grams or 100 milligrams, and this is information that has to be included in the label. There are no limits to state the amount of trans fats. That is to say, everything above 0 grams has to be declared. And here we see Supreme Decree 017, the one that approved the regulations of the law on healthy nutrition. We see the technical parameters, and
al final, como ustedes podrán ver,
and here for marketing purposes, and here you can see at the end the parameters for soy content and also the content of saturated fats in food and beverages, and at the end we see fats and trans fats, and here it says that they will be approved within six months of the implementation of the law, and it says that in July this year, this is the law that will be implemented, and then it also refers to marketing, and it indicates that this law should also be implemented. And then there is a law, this law, the one that I mentioned before, on the promotion of healthy nutrition, and also the marketing warnings that have to be included in the labels, and they should underscore in bold that consumption should be avoided. And here again, we see the figure octagon that is included on all of the foodstuff that has trans fats, and at the bottom we see how it says avoid consumption. Then Supreme Decree 033, that is the one that established the reduction, the gradual reduction in foodstuff and beverages. We see the scope of application, and we see that it does not apply to food and non-alcoholic beverages that have not been subject to industrialization processes, and it also refers to primary or minimal processing. And then we also see the ones that this is not applied either to those food items that are prepared according to the legislation. And also, once again, in all cases, at the bottom, we see that this does not apply to processed foodstuff and non-alcoholic beverages that have been produced according to the regulation. And this is to be included and be taken into account for private production and marketing. The reduction and elimination of trans fats at Article 6 indicates that the gradual process for reduction up to the elimination of trans fats in food and beverage and non-alcoholic beverages that are industrially processed. And first, we're going to see that the first subparagraph indicates that up to 18 months as of the enforcement of the regulations, the use and or content of the trans fat should not be higher than, and here we see the product. Whenever these are fats, vegetable oils, and margarine, the limit for trans fats is 2 grams per 100 or 100 gram or 100 milligram of fat. And whenever we have the rest of food and non-alcoholic beverages that are industrially processed, the limit is 5 grams of trans fatty acids every 100 gram or 100 milliliters of the product. At subparagraph number 2, for the elimination or reduction of trans fatty acids, we see that starting with the implementation of the regulations, the use will be also limited whenever this is related to partially hydrogenated oils in processed food and non-alcoholic beverages. And this is a document that was issued in July 2021, where the Ministry of Health communicated on the gradual reduction of trans fatty acids in food and non-alcoholic beverages that are industrially processed. And as you will see at 6.3 of Supreme Decree 033, we see that in the case of products that have trans fatty acids of industrial origin, which are different from partial hydrogenation, the health authority at the national level will grant the corresponding authorization as long as it is shown that there is scientific evidence and technical evidence that the maximum possible content of trans fatty acids has been reduced for its processing and that there is no technological substitution for the total elimination. being impossible to exceed the limit of trans fatty acids of 2 grams of trans fatty acids per 100 grams or 100 milliliters, exceptionally in order to gradually eliminate the total content, and also in the follow-up on the contents of the trans fatty acids, and also to assess the changes in consumption by the population. We see that the compliance of this resolution on foodstuff, Peru published this document, and also in the copy that is the Institute for the Defense of Consumers and Intellectual Property order the halting of distribution and marketing, and also the market withdrawal of 3 products that would exceed the limit of trans fatty acids. And this happened this week, about 3 days ago. And there, for example, we see the products that were assessed, and we see the ones that were asked to be removed from the market. They were recalled, and also their marketing and consumption were halted. So I really thank you for sharing with you this experience, the experience of Peru, and Beatriz Quispe from the Ministry of Health will be sharing with you additional information and also addressing the questions you may have. Thank you very much. Greetings to you all. Thank you very much, Nestor. We're going to continue with the questions and comments as Beatriz add something to this, but I thank you for the complete presentation with everything that has been done and all the progress made in Peru in this process to eliminate industrially produced trans fatty acids, and also supporting other policies that may support implementation and also enforcement of these elimination measures. With this, I think that I am going to move on to questions, but most of the questions have been addressed through the chat function here or the Q&A function here on Zoom. But one of the questions that I would like to go back to has to do with Chantal, to see if she would like to add something in connection with the monitoring and surveillance systems as well as enforcement systems for imported products. This is a question that was directly addressed to Canada.
How Canada is proceeding with the surveillance, monitoring, and enforcement of imported products in regards to the PHO ban. Thank you.
Yes, and as I mentioned, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, of course, is responsible for enforcement of the regulation, so they would have more details, but we keep asking them those questions. And, you know, like I think one of the things is through the ingredient list, like you can see if partially hydrogenated oils have been added. And also there's a lot of hope with this method that they want to develop. I think Isabel answered in the chat, there was a specific question about the PHO method, like, you know, how to detect PHO. And the CFIA has been working to develop this method. And so this method could be applied for imported foods just as well as for domestic foods.
Thank you, Chantal. And also complementing that, and also addressing one of the questions that Dr. Cole posed to us in terms of, you know, how to strengthen the monitoring of these products and enforce the elimination of PHOs. I've also shared in the chat the link of a WHO protocol for monitoring trans fatty acids and trying to emphasize on those trans fatty acids originating from partially hydrogenated oils. So that may also be useful source that countries can use while developing their monitoring systems and enforcement systems to eliminate trans fatty acids, to eliminate partially hydrogenated oils, in particular, also using them when it refers to imported products. And I think another question that was also a question, and I think a suggestion, a good insight that we heard from Guyana on some of the difficulties that countries face on coping with industry opposition to regulation, right? And what we know from previous countries and from the evidence is that voluntary actions were not effective in eliminating this harmful substance. So regulation is needed to advance as quick and as strong as necessary to eliminate those. And I think one of the points in terms of applying the regulation is to make clear that yes, industry will in some countries might have some, you might see some opposition, but as the elimination takes place in most countries throughout the world, we've seen less of an opposition from industry. This well-recognized replacement option. So I think maybe if Canada and Peru could also mention how they've been coping with industry, if there has been some opposition, or if they're all in agreement to what's something that they were already taking as a step to eliminate these trans fatty acids, as we've learned from different countries. So maybe Chantal and colleagues from Peru could comment on that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in Canada, when we created the task force to reduce trans fat, we had significant involvement from the Heart and Stroke Foundation, a non-government organization, and they played a key role they actually co-chaired the task force, and it was really important. They really helped with raising awareness, and I think, that's one of the strategy is certainly engaging with associations such as the Heart and Stroke Foundation, etc. I think raising awareness also to consumers, consultation is very important, like to gain interest and awareness through these mechanisms. That's really important to gain support for the initiative. As I said, like the Heart and Stroke was really key. So when we did the media release, we did a joint media release, etc. So. And also writing to the Minister of Health, like having these really, not only associations like that, but health professionals to write into the minister, et cetera, to also so that their voice can be heard. Because we know that often industry does have quite a bit of resources to advocate for certain legislation or not certainly legislation. So it's important to really engage the health professional side of the equation.
Thank you very much, Chantal. Yes, I mean, I think when it comes to protecting the public health, comes a priority. And I understand that some industry might not want to be regulated for some of those products, but not only from a health perspective, but life always proceed, trade, even in WTO agreements and principles that comes into play. So I think that's a good point on trying to bring the whole of society to support something that should be done to protect life wherever this life is, and could be even the ones that are in the industry sector as well. So we're here in trying to protect the life of all the entire population. So the other point and some of the questions that and that was mentioned in terms of other complementary measures, like the one that Peru mentioned, using front of pack labeling, bringing standardization to the list of ingredients, so you can easy the identification of those products when you're monitoring imported products, and also laboratory capacity. There's some things that countries have been looking for to try to expand and how those policies being well implemented and enforced. So I think in terms of the labeling, some countries, even when they are eliminating them, they still adopt the front of pack labeling for that, because there might be still some products that, even though they don't have PHOs no longer present there may be still concentrated amounts of other sorts of trans fatty acids. So just in case this is the case, then there's some still warning labels on the front of the pack, for instance, that could be used. And also the ingredients list could help them identify if there's partially hydrogenated oils coming from imported products, and banning from that. And in terms of laboratory, what many countries have been mentioning, I think, trying to build their capacity, but also at the same time move along legislation that will eliminate those. As we know that sometimes the country does not have that laboratory capacity set for monitoring that, but also the lack of legislation could make it even more difficult for them. So if they don't have a legislation, they will have more difficulty in making the case that they need laboratory capacity to enforce such legislation. So, I mean, it's really important that countries can move on with their legislation, so they can also can make the case that they need to improve the laboratory capacities. And I think what Diana mentioned goes into that direction, so that working on amending that legislation while trying to bring their laboratory capacity to meet those, and also trying to get those to help the enforcement once the laws and regulations are in place. And I've also wanted to bring the issue that Dr. Kroll mentioned about restricting the export. And I don't know if Chantal or colleagues from Peru has something on their countries related to that, if they wanted to comment on anything. We so far we haven't seen many countries do that, and I mean in general, not only for trans fatty acids, but I think that's a very interesting point and suggestion we could explore at sub-regional and international global level to be discussed. So I don't know if from Canada or Peru, if you have any restrictions in terms of export, if there's something that you've discussed or not, if you want to comment something on that.
Yes, this is Chantal again. We did not, the regulation, the food and drug regulations in Canada, the way that they are built is that it's about the foods that are sold in Canada. So we don't typically have regulations related to foods that are exported. So typically foods that are exported have to meet the regulation in the country to which they will be exported to. So we don't have something specific related to exported foods.
Néstor, ¿sabes si hay alguna restricción en relación a lo que se puede exportar de Perú? Bueno, sabemos
Is there any restriction regarding whatever has to be or can be exported? So we know that whatever is exported is also marketed, but we'd also like to know whether there is any export restriction. In the case of Peru, whenever these are imported products, a request was presented in 2016 and up to date to continue with importations, but with adhesive labeling. That is to say that at the time of marketing the product, the importers had to place that adhesive indicating trans fatty acids content. This has already expired, even though there is a proposal to enhance, to extend the deadline. The health authority is firm for this not to be extended. It has to be labeled, because 5 years have already gone by. We cannot continue to ask for extensions. This should be a step back for public health. And I think that we still have it, and I think that we will continue to have it. Thank you very much, Nestor. The other question that I see, and we are about to close, has to do with the existence of recent studies on trans fatty acids in maternal milk and also transmission to babies. But we do have some studies in the literature regarding this, regarding the relationship between the consumption by mothers and also the presence in breast milk, as well as consumption by babies. And this is nothing that would indicate that breastfeeding should be restricted. Quite the contrary, we need to continue to recommend breastfeeding exclusively up to 6 months, and then continue with supplementary foodstuff for those elements that are recommended by WHO. But even at this stage in life, it is important to restrict consumption of industrially produced trans fatty acids. Something else that was asked is whether it is possible to reduce at least 2 grams of trans fatty acids every 100 grams of fat, and it is possible. And the online course will offer you both options, and as a matter of fact, 3 options for policies to eliminate industrially produced trans fatty acids. And one of them is the one that was adopted and presented today by Canada, the elimination of partially hydrogenated oils, and the other one is the reduction on industrially produced trans fatty acids at no more than 2 grams every 100 grams of fats. And also in the case of Peru, for example, other countries, Brazil, other countries have combined both strategies precisely because some countries, even with the elimination of partially hydrogenated oils, still have some other forms that may exceed 2%, and then there is a combination of the elimination of partially hydrogenated oils with the restriction of having no more than 2 grams of trans fatty acids every 100 grams of total fats, to make sure that both have the best possibility to eliminate the industrially produced trans fatty acids. With this, we close. We thank you all for the very active participation by all of the participants, in particular, all of the presenters that were here with us. And now I give the floor to the director of the Department of Non-Communicable Diseases and Mental Health with PAHO, Dr. Anselm Hennes, for his closing remarks. Dr. Hennes, you have the floor.
Thank you so very much. And we have reached the end of the launch of this self-learning virtual course on the World Health Organization. Replace trans fat, an action package to eliminate industrially produced trans fatty acids. Well, first and foremost, I would like to express my appreciation to the speakers for their valuable contribution to our webinar. We have all learned much from our presenters. My deepest gratitude also goes out to each of you who has attended and has helped to make this event the success it has been, and to everyone who's made this online course possible. The elimination of industrially produced trans fatty acids from the food supply is one of the priority targets identified in the draft 13th General Program of Work of the WHO, which will guide the work of the organization in 2019 to 2023. This course is part of PAHO's efforts to support the region of the Americas in advancing the plan of action for the Elimination of Industrially Produced Trans Fatty Acids 2020 to 2025. And we are also sure that this training can be useful to our member states and many collaborators in the region of the Americas and beyond. Trans fats, as you've heard, have no health benefits and indeed are harmful, while their elimination from the food supply is imminently feasible and achievable, as we've heard from the experts and from the different country experiences. During the past decade, various policy actions, including mandatory and voluntary trans fatty acid labeling, reformulation, and national local industrially produced trans fatty acid prohibitions, have been implemented by countries aiming to restrict the trans fatty acid content of foods and reduce their intake in populations. Hearing such examples from countries has improved our understanding about how to implement actions to eliminate trans fatty acids from the food supply through the implementation of various policy actions. And these experiences have also highlighted the need to expand capacity building throughout the region to improve the effectiveness and scaling up of this goal of eliminating trans fatty acids from the food supply in this region. We've understood that it is critical to familiarize authorities of the member states as well as the general public themselves, as we heard today. We also this needs to include the government officials, including various policy makers, food control or safety authorities who are involved in the design, monitoring, evaluation relating to nutrition policies. Additionally, the government bodies that advocate for and enforce the relevant policies. And thirdly, the other big group is civil society organizations, which includes academic and research institutions, nutrition scientists, laboratories, public health professionals, as well as food system operators. And they all need to become familiar with the Replace strategic approach and its 6 modules to eliminate industrially produced trans fatty acids from the food supplies. And if we can all pull together and get behind this idea, we can ultimately achieve the goal of global elimination by 2023. I would like to extend a special thanks to the interpreters who have been key to the success of this webinar. And finally, my sincere thanks to all who've been involved in the preparation of this online course and in the organization of this event. Let us work together to make the elimination of industrially produced trans fatty acids a reality. Thank you all so very much, and have a good day. So I now bid you farewell and bye-bye. Thank you.
All right, thank you.